history and slavery and things of that nature. Um, and then the last thing that we're focusing on here, we have an event coming up in August, God willing, with everything that's going on, if the COVID numbers are staying low, that we're calling Afro Hub. And this is an effort to help bring together Black-owned businesses. And so we're trying to provide an environment for Black-owned businesses, vendors, caterers, artisans to all get together and almost have like a mini micro Afro town. Just kind of like you have Chinatown and Koreatown. Well, this is going to be like a little pop-up Afro town. We handle all the marketing, the music, and just trying to bring the community together to raise awareness around Afro culture. So that's a little bit about heritage and what we do. Due to the most recent events with COVID-19 and having to be forced to, sit in our house and watch what's going on out there in the world, a lot of things have really surfaced and raised their ugly heads. Dating back to the thing that happened with Ahmaud Arbery, and that which wasn't law enforcement based. We started hearing things about Breonna Taylor, which we're still fighting to try and get justice for. And then I think the thing that broke the camel's back for a lot of people was the George Floyd murder. And so as a company at Heritage that really focuses on how to empower the Black community, we developed this Black and Blue panel discussion, which is really meant to be a conversation around both police brutality, Black on Black violence, as well as other Black issues that we're facing today. So we have a decent group of panelists, a decent number group of panelists that we want to introduce. So we'll start out with Larry. If you can kind of tell us a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and then what's one of your favorite things about Afro culture.
Thanks again for inviting me part of this discussion. My name is Larry Rhodes. Born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm currently a product manager at Northwestern Mutual. Been with the company for about 15 years. Work with some of the co-founders of Heritage. I just, I would say my wife is Nigerian, right? So there's a lot of things I like about the African culture, the food. I like the clothing, the Afro beats. So those are the things I like about Afro culture. I'm just looking forward to being part of this discussion.
Great, thanks, Larry. I'll go to the next panelist, someone who's near and dear to my heart, my father, Frank McDonald. If you can tell us a little bit about who you are, why you came, what you do, and what's your favorite thing about Afro culture.
Okay, hey, thanks again for having me. Like you said, my name is Frank McDonald, Kyle's dad. I was born in New Orleans, Louisiana, raised in Detroit, Michigan, educated in Detroit public schools, graduated from Western Michigan University, and have been flying for United Airlines as a pilot for them for now over about 30 years. What fascinates me about the culture of African people and Black Americans is, since I go all over the world, I see our culture all over the world. I mean, the first time I went to Japan, the music that they select and that they play in their restaurants, in their convenience stores, is our music. You go to Australia, it's our music. You go to China, it's our music. They mimic us. They try to dress in our style. So it's a fascinating thing to see how we have spread all over the globe and yet we still are fighting this fight that we're fighting today. They respect us on certain levels, but then kind of disregard us on other levels. So we have things that the world wants because we can see it in everyday life. We can see it in everyday commercials and songs and even political ads. But we have to, I believe, push forward more to show that we have value in other areas and to be respected more. But what's fascinating to me is how we have spread and our culture has spread just all over the globe. But thanks for having me, and I'll yield the floor.
Thanks, Deb. Dr. Washington.
Yes, sir. Again, man, thank you guys for allowing me to be a part of this. I thanked you before, and I'll do it again. I think this is a really important and work. And as I listen to you guys and talk, and you guys talk about all the things that you guys are doing, it's just extraordinary. And I really want to, again, commend you all for putting this together and allowing me to be a part of it. As I said earlier, my name is Troy Washington, and I'm a faculty fellow at the Helen Bader Institute at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee. Just real quick, I received my PhD in urban education with concentration in nonprofit leadership. I told you guys before, I was born and brewed here in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I've been a part of almost every stage of it. You know, I've been here several decades now. It's weird to say, but I've been here for several decades now, and just to see these changes, albeit slow. But when I see brothers and sisters, or it seems to be mostly brothers, a part of their heritage organization, doing these kinds of things, it's just something to put my hat on. I'm really proud, and yeah, it's something to see. One of the things I enjoy about our culture is our resilience, really, just our ability to still maintain under the most harshest circumstances, yet still stand tall. That's something impressive to me. But in addition to that is how we're the cultural curators. We determine what's hot and what's not. Pretty much to what the brother was saying, Mr. McDonald was saying, like everywhere I've gone to, I too had an opportunity to travel to Japan. And I was literally sitting on the subway. I was sitting in the subway, and the kids, the youth, they were fascinated by me. They were fascinated by me. And at first I felt a type of way about it. But as time went on, I realized that they were just really mesmerized by my Blackness. So much so that after I got off the train, they started to engage me in conversation with their broken English about my experiences with the music and the culture here in America, and how, you know, they were hip hop heads and how much they enjoyed the music, and they wanted to know my perspective. So I say that to say that just, you know, for us, it's, you know, our resilience, and that we push the needle. Our culture pushes the needle. It doesn't move without us. So that's me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks, Dr. Washington. Let's go to Uncle Bruce McClue. Can you tell us real quick who you are, what you do, and what's one of your favorite things about Afro culture?
Okay. My name is Bruce McClue, and I am Kyle's great uncle, so I guess I'm the oldest one here. What I do, wow, it's kind of hard to define what I do because I do so many things. So I'll distinguish between what is my vocation and what is my passion, and I try to combine the two. My vocation is that I work for a nonprofit organization in the city of New Orleans, and our focus is on what we call environmental. We address issues such as climate change, why most states will allow permits for manufacturing companies in people of color neighborhoods and not people of non-color neighborhoods, and understanding that the state of Louisiana have the highest rate of asthma for people of color, especially young African-American children, because they live in most places where there are manufacturing plants. And those emissions that are being put into the water, into the air, are affecting their health. The other thing is that we train people for underprivileged people, for minority, for environmental jobs. So things such as when you hear people talking about cleaning up Superfund sites, working around asbestos and lead-based paint, cleaning up our own neighborhoods that have been polluted for hundreds of years. That's what we do also. My passion is to educate people that American history is Black history. There would not be America without African Americans. We have done everything to build this country without benefiting from its wealth. And unless people understand that we have been marginalized because of our will to make do of what they give us, they didn't give us the best of anything, so we made gumbo. Uh, they gave us the worst of the pigs, so we made chitlins, and now they want to eat that. They gave us the worst fish, so now they want to love and eat redfish down here. So I like to educate people on education of Black Americans. I'm a super advocate of HBCUs. Without HBCUs, we would not have a lot of our doctors, our lawyers, our MBAs, our PhDs in chemistry, and those particular things. So I am a super advocate of HBCU experience. Again, I heard one talk about our music. Hey, they don't talk about UCLA band. They talk about Grambling, Southern, FAMU, Alabama State. So I try to combine my passion with my vocation to educate our people and to push them forward. And I'm glad to be here. My nephew called at the last minute, but hey, I was just watching King Kong. I could put that on Tebow for a while and watch it later.
Wow, that's awesome. Thanks, Uncle Bruce. Let's go to Mr. Wendell Reddick. How are you doing, sir?
How you doing, Cal?
Phenomenal.
How you
Thanks
guys
for
doing?
joining us. Good, good.
I got the late invite. You know your dad always talked me into things.
I know it, but you showed up.
I did.
So,
well,
thank you. Yeah.
To answer your questions of what's your vocation, what you're doing, for the rest of the panel, I'm kind of like a family friend. I guess I'll be like a foster dad to Kyle. Him and my son kind of grew up together, and Frank McDonald, his father, and we've been running together for quite a while. I'm a 30-year retired military guy. Served in the Army for 30 years. Vocation was aviation. I'm continuing to work with aviation today. My passion is educating young Black folks to new things, especially in the aviation world. Ms. McDonald and I spent a little bit of time working with the young group here in Colorado Springs, trying to introduce Blacks and inner city kids to aviation. So that's kind of my passion. What do I like about the Black culture? I'm a child of the 60s. I can't see Uncle Bruce, whoever he is. I don't want to compare birth certificate, but I'm a child of the 50s and 60s. When we wore the dashiki, and we thought we were connected with our African culture. What I am elated with today is to see folks like Kyle and young men, young women get in touch with their African roots and bringing it back. I think we kind of disconnected there in the late 70s, early 80s. We disconnected from our African roots, and I appreciate everything the Heritage is doing and the work that Kyle is doing and others that are working with him. And I am in awe and impressed to see that work and want to see more of it with our young folks and bringing it back. And that's pretty much me in a nutshell.
Awesome. Thanks, Mr. Wendell. And I think last but certainly not least, Dr. Baker.
How y'all doing? I appreciate everybody jumping on and having this conversation. Kyle, thanks for coming in Milwaukee and really having accelerated very popular, important conversation about our connection to Africa. When I was a student at University of Wisconsin, Milwaukee, Pan-Africanism you could feel it all over the campus and in the city. And what's happened since the 90s is we've seen hip hop and street culture sort of wrestle away our connection to our African roots. And so I'm glad to know that you're in the city doing this work, because it's definitely needed. And it's something you come in a long tradition of people who have come outside the city to remind us how important this is. So I appreciate your efforts. But, I have a lot to say on this, but just from my perspective, the cultural impact of Black people across the world is phenomenal. Whether it's sports, music, I play soccer. That's how I actually got to college. And when I was a kid, it was nothing but white kids playing soccer on TV, and the internet didn't exist. So when I watched soccer, I had to see, European boys, real skinny playing. And what's happened over the last 10, 15 years in my sport, it's people like Didier Drogba, N'Golo Kante, and people all around the continent taking the sport over. And now they've come to the United States and have brought that swag and culture to the United States. And to see the exchange in Milwaukee's inner city of Black kids and African natives from the Congo, Tanzania, Somalia, all over the country, Eritrea, all over the continent, interacting with Black Americans in Milwaukee is revolutionary. And it excites me very much.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Baker. And thank all of you panelists for coming by and engaging in a conversation today. Let's go ahead and jump into the first topic. One of the things that we've been talking about at Heritage is this notion of Black on Black violence. And I really want to destroy this term, because every time I hear the term Black on Black violence, it makes me feel a certain way. And it wasn't until I started to really dig deep into the research and understand what it actually meant. A lot of times when we hear the term Black on Black violence, it's coming from the mouth of an all lives matter proponent that is trying to use it as a counter argument to police brutality. And it's almost, it sets this tone where it almost feels like, when you use it in this context, it almost feels like we as Black people have a double standard. Like, we're up in arms when we see a police officer kill a Black person, but when a Black person kills a Black person, nobody says anything about it. It makes it seem like as Black people, we're inferior because we kill our own. It makes it seem like we are segmented. It makes it feel like we have a low racial esteem. And so I really wanted to look at some of the data to understand, what are the truths and what are the lies about Black on Black crime. And so in this questionnaire, I gathered research from a bunch of different sources, but one of the things that stuck out to me was an article that was written by Ian Felting, a mental health and psychotherapist practitioner. He says, there's no evidence that Black on Black crime is any worse than white on white crime across socioeconomic classes. And so I took that for what it was. When I read that, I said, okay, it's not an inherently Black thing. Black on Black crime is not uniquely Black. There is white on white crime. Okay, so I started to look at, well, what are the actual rates? And when I look at the rates, you see that white on white crime, like if white victims of homicide they have an 80% or higher chance of dying from another white person. And Blacks are at 93%. That's from the Bureau of Justice Statistics from 1980 to 2008. So then I said, okay, like under what circumstances, why are Blacks killing each other? Why are whites killing each other? The FBI produced a study that showed that one of the numbers that really poked out at me was that 65% of black on black crime cases were drug related. And so that was an overrepresentation from the other races. And so just kind of seeing this, it provided me some semblance of comfort is a bad word to say, but it did provide me some semblance of comfort because it made it so that it wasn't a black thing. Black on black violence isn't a black phenomenon. It happens in all races across the world, but that's not to say that black on black violence is not a problem. When I look at statistics from Statista, it shows the number of blacks that were killed at the hands of police over the past 4 years. And if you look at that chart, it's about, on average, 200 blacks a year are shot by police officers. If you compare that to whites, they've had around 400 a year are killed by police officers. But I thought it was interesting because you never see that side of policing on the mainstream media. You don't usually see police officers killing other white people, right? And so, like, when we are constantly fed this narrative where police officers are going out and actively like killing black people, and it's this huge problem. Okay, yes, the racial inequity, that's a huge problem. But when you look at the numbers, 200 people on average a year versus how many people are dying due to drug-related violence in black on black crime situations, where you have around 5,000 deaths per year, that's a big difference. And so, yes, we do need to we do need to deal with the inequities in police relations. But I also think that, we need to understand the problem with black on black violence, understand what that notion actually means, and let's talk about why. Dr. Washington, do you have any inputs on maybe some of the contributors to why we have black on black violence?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's so interesting because you're hitting on it, fairly well. What you're talking about is the socioeconomic disparities, right? You're talking about the disparities, the socioeconomic disparities that exist in our communities far greater than any other community. But what they don't conveniently report is, as you said, how it's an issue of proximity. White folk in their areas kill white folk. Black folk in black communities kill black folk. And much of it is largely due to, as I said, the disparities. But I'm always concerned when a question like that is asked, as if that is at the heart of our problems, right? As an ethnographic researcher, and what an ethnographic researcher is simply someone that is allowed to enter the community and do research on that community. I realize that black on black violence is a legitimate concern, but a greater concern is the limited amount of resources communities of color have, or the health disparities, or the educational deficits. Those are some of the things that we're not properly addressing. If the system really wants to reduce black on black violence, provide adequate resources to black communities, value our contributions, as the brother said during his introduction. It's the devaluing of black people and black lives that are at the center of many of the problems. If you want to drastically reduce black violence, provide adequate resources, value our contributions, provide our community members with gainful employment, and you'll quickly see a drastic reduction in black on black violence. Based on my research, and this is empirical data. This is empirical data that is provided to me and that comes across my desk on a daily basis. We're not doing enough to address those kinds of socioeconomic issues that are pervasive in urban communities, in black communities that I was born and raised in. So that is, to me, as far as I see it, that is at the heart of the reasons why you see this black on black violence. It's really an act of proximity that is largely attributed to the wealth inequalities.
Can I say something? I know I'm not a panelist, but
Yes, absolutely.
I just wanted to, in reference to your numbers, I understand that looking at pure numbers, it looks like, okay, more white people are killed by police, but there are 5 times as many white people in this country as there are black people. So if that were anywhere near really reflective of what's happening, if 200 black people have been murdered by police, that should be looking more like 1,000 white people, not 400. That's still percentage-wise a very low number. And speaking to what Mr. Washington was saying, I absolutely agree, but those resources were taken from us on purpose because it's
Yes, ma'am.
economically functional for
Yes,
this
ma'am.
capitalist society
Yes,
to
ma'am.
keep these people underserved so that they can take them into the prisons. The
Absolutely. But that's,
prison labor
yeah.
industry is
Yes, ma'am.
why these resources were taken away from us.
Absolutely. And we'll talk about that later too. You know, that's a different kind of conversation. Absolutely, though. I agree wholeheartedly.
Does anybody else have anything they want to say about this?
I do agree with Dr. Washington about the proximity. Had this discussion with other family members as well as about, you're going to kill yourself or around who you are, around your community, right? And it's not like it's, it comes back to what Dr. Washington was talking about the resources as well. We need to come up with solutions, come up with ways to fund different resources that's going to help the inner city or help Black people as general about education. Like when it comes to the inner city has some of the worst education or school systems in the nation. So we have to find ways to fund and improve our school system so it improves the education of our youth, which will hopefully allow them to be good resources as they grow up. Also about mental health too. I think a lot of violence has to do with like mental health issues as well. So we have to find ways to come up with resources to provide help to the inner city, to inner city residents, provide them with ways to how to cope with their anger, how to find ways to get off of drugs. A lot of violence is due to drugs. So I think those are some of the some of the things that we can do, to decrease the violence within inner city. I don't want to call it black on black violence, but I would just want to say violence within the inner city.
There's a quote by Malcolm X, and I always like this quote because I think we live in these times and where we're pointing fingers at our people, but it says, if you're not careful, the newspapers will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. And I've lived in Milwaukee enough to remember when it wasn't super violent in the early 80s. But I remember the early 90s, it was off the chain, boy. It was off the chain. But we've, over the last several years, we've actually seen reductions in violence, not just here, but all across the country. Over the last year, we've seen a uptick, and we can go into mental health and COVID and all that other stuff. But the narrative has always been like, y'all Black folks are killing each other. And that's part of, everybody's hitting on it, but it's also part of societal control. If we can have policies that are, saying that these kids are out of control, that gives them the right to take the basketball courts down. That gives them the right to take away the team dance clubs. And then it allows them to further push us out of our communities.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
And so I just always like that Malcolm X quote because it reminds me of how things really are.
Absolutely.
To add a little bit to the discussion about the statistic that concerns the police killings of Blacks and whites. Usually at work, when I'm talking to someone about it, there's a white guy that passes by and throws out the Fox News jargon. Well, more whites are killed by police officers. So I'm like, okay, you're right. But what the statistics don't show, and I'm not sure how you can get that statistic, but what is the underlying reason why that Black person lost their life in an altercation or basically a meeting with the police officer? Most of the violences that we've seen against Blacks by police, a lot of times the Black wasn't doing anything.
Right.
He wasn't involved in a crime. He wasn't running from a crime scene with stolen goods. He didn't just shoot up a theater full of people. He didn't just walk into a church and gun down everyone that was just praying. He didn't do any of that. He was just going home. He was just leaving the store. He was just walking through or running through a neighborhood. He had his hands up. He wasn't aggressive. He was turned around, maybe running from a cop, shot in the back. So those are the kind of things that I would like to see put in some of these statistics. What were some of the underlying issues that were going on at the time? They always like to say, oh yeah, well, more white people are killed by cops. Well, what are some of those white people doing at the time that they are killed by cops? Were they in their grandmother's backyard doing nothing? Or were they actually engaged in some criminal activity? See, we like to lump, or they like to lump all that stuff into that one big pot and then tout that one statistic. But let's look at, and I don't know how we can do that, let's look at the reasons behind that. Because, you know, we had a theater shooting in Colorado, in Aurora. That brother got taken alive. I mean, how do you kill as many people as he did that day and be taken alive? We had Colorado Springs guy walk into a Planned Parenthood. He had already shot a cop. He had already killed the cop. He had already shot someone inside and shot another person. He got taken alive. How do you do that? We had the guy that walked into the church, killed a bunch of people in there. He got taken alive. But we have all these other black people. Yeah, taking lunch before he got taken to jail. Okay, so how does that happen? How does that even transpire? But you got a black guy pulled over and gets killed over a traffic stop. No weapon, no aggression, no history of just committing a violent crime or anything like that. Those are the statistics that I believe that I think inflames us more, because we know there's a racial undertone to why this guy was killed. We know it just wasn't, well, you know, he just finished committing a crime. He just finished gunning down some people. He had a weapon on him, and the cops felt that, oh, they had to take him down. No, most of these criminals or most of these crimes are committed against unarmed black people. So that's one of the statistics that I would like to see brought out in some of these numbers.
Yeah, and one thing that I definitely wanted to add to that on that point is these statistics aren't even showing all of the people that, quote, died in custody. I mean, we've seen on multiple different occasions where the police are submitting these reports and they're ruling the cause of death something other than the truth. Right? I think it was with was it Elijah McClain, where they had I mean, it was obvious what they did to the guy. They pretty much put him into a cardiac arrest, and then they injected him with like 500 milligrams of ketamine, and he pretty much went into a coma for 6 days, and then he died. But the reason why they said he died was because of some kind of medical diagnosis where he just got too excited from fear or something like that. And so it was, at the end of the day, it wasn't the cops' fault. And what I'm saying is, I'm sure there's a lot of situations where that happens that don't get reported. So even when we do look at these numbers and it's like 200 something per year, you got to know that, yeah, there's more than that, the things that didn't get reported as well. One of the other questions too that I kind of had with what you were saying was, you know, when we have seemingly innocent black people going around and being targeted by cops, what can we do in those situations? What should we do? That's an open question for anybody.
Can I say something? This is Bruce. What you need, let me tell you what has happened in the city of New Orleans to reduce violent interactions with police officers with our Black youth. They have been under a consent decree for the last 5 years. They are being probed and monitored. You cannot tell the fox to look over the hen house when it's the fox that's killing the hens. And I have always been an advocate that most police officers are not trained correctly. Because for the most part, all you need is 6 months of training to become a police officer. But in the state of Louisiana, you have to have a minimum of 2 years of training to be a beautician. Now, if I'm licensed to carry a weapon and kill somebody, I think training should be a little bit more. The other thing too is you're just not policing for crimes, but now, as the brother said before, people have mental issues. And the reason why we have a lot of mental issues, especially in the Black community, is because we had, I don't know if you heard this governor that we had, Bobby Jindal. He shut down all the mental institutions that we had in Louisiana. So even the small things, people could not seek out unless you had, again, medical insurance. So again, if you don't have any medical insurance, you have medical issues. And this is something that has been ingrained. And it's one of the best books I ever read in my life by Carter G. Woodson, The Miseducation of the Negro. If you never read it, you need to read it. And when you are taught and indoctrinated at a very young age to conform to whatever image they want you to have, then those images that you see are what you're going to reflect later on in your life. So if you are taught to hate what you see in the mirror or what you perceive to be what it is, and it has no worth, then it's easier for you to pull that trigger. It's easier to become violent towards that person. Remember in the late 60s and the early 70s, we walked around how I'm Black and I'm proud. Everybody, we had Black is beautiful, right on. The Afro pick, and then we kind of lost that in the 80s, 90s, and when we say it's all about me, get me in mind, bling bling, so forth, so on. But when it comes to policing, the police has to be policed, because if their training is not conducive to the culture in which they're policing, they will see every act as an act of aggression. Because what you hear now, remember I'm saying my age again, Car 54 and Adam 12. Remember, those guys actually had to see a gun and a gun pointed towards them to retaliate with violent and deadly force. But now it's accepted. Well, I thought my life was in danger, or I thought he had a weapon, or I thought I saw a gun. That's the narrative now. It's no longer you have to be sure of what you have, but all you gotta say, I fear for my life. So if pulling a gun is a fearing for your life is the excuse for pulling a gun, well, every time I walk out my house, I should have a gun in my hand ready for action, because again, the fear is there. So I believe that police should be policed by independent panels that has educators on there who have mental health people, because they suffer from post-traumatic stress, and they're not going to seek help, because they seek help for post-traumatic stress or mental issues, they'll get thrown off the force for most of the part. So they'll keep all that stuff bottled up inside in them until they meet somebody on the street, and all of a sudden it comes out and they're indifference. So you cannot police effectively a culture of people that you don't know, you don't understand, but you've been hired to indoctrinate it by your police force to just keep them in their cages. And if they try to get out their cages, then use deadly force and we'll back you up. So I think that's part of the violence that we have with young Black people among themselves, or either older people now, because it become a cultural thing, has been indoctrinated into them, that they have, again, their worth have been self-marginalized, and is passed on generational. You have generational people that believe that they don't have any self-worth, and you're not going to make it, you're not going to be any good. Coupled with not having the resources, coupled with having the worst schools, coupled with not having anyone to go home to that will understand you, all that balls over to, again, I'm going to go to my basic instincts of animalism, and I'm going to retaliate any kind of way that I can. Thank you.
It's also a matter of, I think the three easy ways that we could fix all of this is: one, take away their immunity; two, anytime they turn off their personal body cams, that should automatically be an admission of guilt. They should not have the liberty to just say, oh, my camera was off then, so well. Three, whenever they get sued, it should come directly from their pensions first, and then anything else in that lawsuit should be supplemented by the insurance. But it should come straight out of their pockets every time somebody has to come after them, so that their family can feel that heat. I mean, they're still human beings just like us, and they respond to consequences. Cops have been doing whatever they want to do because there have been no consequences. But to what Mr. Bruce was saying, there's also another side of that that I didn't learn until I talked to a friend of mine who was an ex-LAPD officer. He got kicked off of the force, like Chris Dahmer, for trying to stand up against seeing excessive force. It's a cult they have there. Even if you have good cops who try to speak up, they will assassinate your character and get you out of the department. But another part of it is not just their frustration. A lot of those cops can't fight. He said he was in a police academy with a class that was about 100 people, and out of that 100 people, about 90 of them could not fight. And most of them white people ain't never been around a black person. So you're talking about somebody who's been programmed to be scared of black people, who also can't fight. Their fingers on the trigger, they are terrified. That's problem number one at the base level. You shouldn't even be on the street if you can't fight. Anybody who can't fight, of course you're gonna be scary and try to pull for a gun. Like that is just absolutely absurd to me. And also, again, to Mr. McClue's point, 6 months of training, this should, to handle a gun and to decide life and death, they should be at least in training for 2 years to become police officers. 6 months is a ridiculous amount of time.
Okay. It should be on probation for at least
Right.
2 years. The first 2 years
At
of them
least.
being on the force, they should be on probation. And what a lot of people don't understand, they don't understand the rules for engagement. When something happens in our community, a lot of people saying, why did they shoot? Well, you need to understand the rules of engagement. And as you said, we need to get over the revenge factor and get into the monetary factor, because you're not going to hurt them trying to do revenge on them. You're only going to hurt them with the bottom line, and that is the removal of the wealth factor or the ability to make money. And when a lot of our people sell out of court, they fall into that notion of, okay, I'm gonna get mines, but and I'm just gonna get this person fired from this job, but it doesn't remove their credentials to go get a job somewhere else. It should
Wow.
also be, you could never be a cop again.
Absolutely. They should have a license just like we have a license on your driving record. If you have a certain amount of problems with violent situations, it should be a point each time. You hit a certain amount of points, just like your driver's license is taken, your license to be able to serve as a cop should be
Just
taken.
like any other professional medical doctor, I'm pretty sure if Frank, every time he got on that plane, when he backed that plane down the runway and ran into something, they'll take his license away from him.
Exactly.
So you just can't, there ought to be some deadly consequences personally towards them when that happens. And it's not just jail. It's not just jail. It should be something monetary and removal of that person who can never work in that profession again.
Right.
Yeah.
If I can say something about that, so coming from another country, in most countries actually, Nigeria, Europe, cops don't even hold guns. In Europe, they hold batons
Wow.
and a whistle. In Nigeria, it's the same thing. Even if they hold a gun, it's not loaded.
Wow.
And the thing about it, so is if you've been in the military, been to the war or whatever, you can't be a cop, point blank, because they know you get, post, whatever they call it,
PTSD.
whatever, exactly, from war, from all the stuff. And you can't be a cop, point blank. Once that's in your record, there's no even trying to be a cop because they're not gonna let you in. And that's the big mistake they're doing in this country is letting military people be a cop, because even if they hear a firework, it's gonna trigger them because that's just how the stuff is. So until they start, until they start saying that, the big mistake they are doing is letting people that have issues patrol the road, it's gonna continue. And for the fact that, just seeing a black person on the road, it's scary to a lot of people. It's scary to a lot of white people. Just because you're black, they're scared of you because they think, and if you think about it, to me, being racism and all that, it's all jealousy. That's all it is. That's all it is, because they
Absolutely.
know you're better than them in everything.
Absolutely.
Your skin is better than them. Your you're more you're stronger than them. So everything comes down to jealousy. That's all it is. It's jealousy, jealousy, jealousy. And I've told a lot of white people that all what you're doing is you're nothing but jealous. Not that I hate you, I don't hate you, but I'm gonna tell you the real fact. I mean, what do you think you have that is better than me? Nothing really. Not even your skin.
Yeah, Mr. Real quick, Mr. Bruce talked about training. I would go even a step further and point to the kind of training they receive, right? I think that's a lot of the issue too. The kind of training. Are they getting the kind of training that is adequate training, having the kinds of sensitivities to go in certain communities and interact with these individuals? Miss Sheila talked about Miss Sheila and Mr. Femi talked about white fear and implicit biases in a nutshell. Really, these implicit biases really affecting the way individuals interact with us. Many of these officers are coming from these kinds of communities that they've never seen Black people. They've never had to communicate with Black people. And they're bringing the only idea or only place they've seen Black people was on the news and portrayed in a negative way, right? So they bring all these implicit biases into their policing tactics, which doesn't, work well for us. But I will even go a step further and talk additionally about advocating for how policing should look. Conversation needs to be had about, the way police, the way police look, meaning that we should have more people of color being on the department, Black folk being on the police department. Why are our communities heavily patrolled by white officers? Is another kind of conversation that needs to be had or even discussed, because to me that's problematic. There are nuances that happen in my community that you can't relate to, that you just simply can't relate to, and that may make you think that I'm being disrespectful, when in actuality I'm not. So how it looks also should be taken into consideration too. What policing looks like, who are the officers, and us insisting that, no, we need people of color patrolling our community.
I have another point to add, since it looks like we're only going to get to Black violence. I think you're going to need a part B, C, D, E, and F to get through all of the agenda points. But in addition to picking up what Ms. Sheila had pointed out about some of the good cops that are on the force that try to speak out and are drowned out and then eventually drummed out of the police force. If you guys look at the way policing has evolved over time, it's really close to gang mentality in my mind.
Very much.
They basically do exactly what the Crips do, exactly what the Bloods do. Okay. It's just that they have a badge that allows them to get away with a lot of stuff they get away with. Okay. You've got cops on the force that may not be participating in the actual acts, but will cover lie to keep their brothers out of jail, out of court, and everything else. Just like the coroner that lied about how George Floyd died.
Right.
Okay. I mean, the world saw how he died, but yet the coroner came in and said, nope, that ain't how he died. He died through some other means. And so his family had an independent investigation and on their own independent coroner come back and say, okay, yeah, he did die from the pressure on his neck and things like that. So this is a gang mentality from the top down. Police chief, mayor may even be involved, all the way down to the guys coming through training. They are inoculated into and indoctrinated into this gang mentality. And I believe that some of these cops are actually in fear of their own brothers that are working with them. Because if you speak out, I mean, imagine you speak out against a cop, you know he's doing bad. Who's to say that, hey, you get called out on a call and it's a setup, fire, shots are fired. Oh, officer so-and-so got caught in the crossfire. He's dead now. That, I believe, has happened. And I believe that that fear permeates the police force. And some of the good cops that would love to speak up, you got to go along with the gang mentality. Same thing if you roll on one of your brothers in the hood. There are guys in jail that would not testify against their own gang members because of the consequences either their families will endure if they did, or themselves if they did. And I believe that's the exact same fear that permeates the police forces of America today. So you have to dismantle this gang mentality through hiring practices, through your screening process, through your profile that you want your cops to be like. And I believe there needs, just like Bruce said, Uncle Bruce said, you need independent panels that are non-related to the police, that are overseers of the police, because policing themselves, that's a joke. That is an absolute joke. So being a pilot, I don't have pilots watching me. They're not the ones that pass judgment. They're not the ones that set the standards I have to live by. That's the FAA that does that.
Right.
I have someone outside of my cockpit telling me and watching me. Police don't. They have their own brothers who are promoted within. That's who they report to. That's who's watching them. And that's a joke. I yield the floor.
But I think that part of it too, I think you're absolutely right, Mr. Frank. But when it come down to a gang, see, you have Bloods and you have Crips. I think that the cops are just like subsets of them hoods. Like you have West Coast Crips, you have Piru Bloods. The cops is just the Pirus. The Ku Klux Klan is the hood. A lot of this is not fear. A lot of this is, I'm going to kill me a nigga today. Some of it is scary. Some of it is the goal of the day. And that's the part that they don't want to talk about either. I don't see a way to really functionally dismantle. I think they have to just get rid of all of them and just start over. Because certain things, like you might be able to alter a garment, like remove a sleeve off of it and fix it and put it back. But this is in the fabric. Like you can't take cotton out of a pair of jeans. Like that's a part of what makes up denim. Like it just seems, I think they did it in Camden, New Jersey, where they just got rid of the whole force, started over from scratch. And then with this new set of policies, they trained all of these new officers up and just started from scratch. That seems like the only functional way to go, because if you still have the same cops with the same mentality, no matter what you try to require them to do, that's still in the fabric of who they are.
I agree. I agree. A fresh start is probably needed. Absolutely.
You know, it's funny.
Yeah, go ahead, Dami.
No, it's funny because was actually found that the LAPD were actually falsifying their information
Big time.
to get more money, because they were found that a lot of them they were labeling certain people they arrested as like gangs or something, because I guess the more gangs they arrest, it were pretty much incentivized, to say that, oh, if you arrested more gangs, you get more money. So anybody that they arrested off the streets, and obviously, many of these people are people of color, they can be like, oh, he was part of this gang, he was part of a gang, and they're gonna make some money off of it. So you're right. They're like, it's a numbers thing, and they're trying to profit off of it. So
Not just a numbers thing. You have to remember the prisons out here, they have to keep at least 90% occupancy, or else they can sue the state. And we're not talking about suing the state for a small amount of money. We're talking about millions and millions of dollars.
yeah, that's
So
what
they'd rather incentivize LAPD to arrest us on BS than to have to pay that fine to these prisons for not keeping them full. And I'm not going to even dig into the roots of that, because a lot of these major record companies like RCA, Sony, a lot of these huge record companies made a deal in the early 90s to glorify gangster rap to keep prisons full when they started investing in private prisons.
And it's even a good
We
thing
are
you brought
set
up.
up on all ends to
I
fail.
like I like that you brought up prisons as well, because that's also one of the topics that we're covering. I think we can even move on to that topic right now, Kyle, if you want to talk about incarceration rates. You're muted, Kyle.
Sorry. Yeah. I was gonna say we're actually at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of everybody's time. We're not gonna have enough time to get through all of this stuff, but I definitely wanted to kind of summarize, what I've been hearing, and see if we can kind of walk away with the same conclusion. I mean, it sounds like obviously the police force is very corrupt. It's corrupt down to the core. How do we fix that? I mean, we're hearing things like, well, we need more training. We're hearing things like we need to dismantle the whole thing. We're hearing things like we need accountability. But when I look at the history of the police force, I mean, it started out as slave patrol.
Yes, sir.
It started out as a mechanism to keep Black people oppressed outside of slavery. And then when you pair that with a lot of the laws that we're seeing today, the petty crimes, I mean, Blacks doing time for marijuana, which is, by the way, legal in a bunch of other states. It should have never been outlawed to begin with. The only reason why it was outlawed is, again, to criminalize Black people. You had the vagrancy laws in the late 1800s, which pretty much made it illegal to be jobless and to be homeless. And so for a community that's just coming out of slavery, that's going to automatically criminalize a large segment of the population. So, I mean, when you look at the objective and the initial reasons why the police force was installed, and you come to the conclusion that it was a way to oppress Black people, it's almost like, do we try and change the system? Do we get rid of it altogether? Or I like one of these questions at the bottom. It's like, do we just leave? Do we just leave the country, go back to our roots? I mean, what can we do? And I know we're out of time, but if anybody wants to chime in on that, we'll kind of make that the last question, and we'll wrap it up.
So I kind of have something to say a bit. So yeah, I think there was a lot of good points that were brought up. But if you ask me, I think maybe the first thing to question is how to put in place an independent agency to evaluate the police. Because even if you bring in, let's say you started with them being being correctly trained and everything, and having that 2-year probation, I think those are things that to be implemented as well. But if you start in that way, there's still gonna be some people that still falls out of that line, or after that. So I think putting in an independent agency to come in rather than letting the police himself. If somewhere we can get those that independent agency in, they can indiscriminately like pretty much determine who pretty much gets to stay in the force, who is gone. They can put in that whole licensing thing in place. They can say, oh, you've had 3 strikes, goodbye. They
It's
can
still subject to corruption.
Right, because they can be intimidated.
That's true. That's true. But I think, starting there and then moving up with all the other, thoughts and ideas that were brought up could be a way to help. And like Mr. Frank said earlier, Mr. Frank, he mentioned about the statistic numbers of the police killings. And my thing is, how are those numbers being quantified? We know that there's a lot of different things that go into this, but we all know that some of these numbers that they're getting is false. Question is how they're quantifying these numbers, and who's quantifying these numbers, and why they are excluding certain factors in these numbers. And I think those are questions to ask in order to then determine who to then put in place, and or who to then talk to put in those other factors to give a better representation of the numbers. I think it's all, and it could also even be that maybe they're quantifying these numbers in order to have some type of way to still control the masses in some weird way, make either to profit off of it or whatever it may be. But I think one of the things for us to figure out how this number is being quantified, so we can know who to put in place to help put in other factors to change these numbers and make it more realistic. It's just like when you go into school and you learn this, you see that map of Africa, and it's like Africa is like this, the United States like this, and then you're like, wait, hold up, like, but you say about all this happened in Africa, then you realize Africa is like this and the United States is like this. It's like, but they still forever want to tell you Africa is this, US is this. You're like, so then it's like, who's doing? So at the end of the day, you gotta be like, okay, we know somebody wrote the book, we know somebody drew the image. Okay, who's telling these people, like, to do these things? And then once we can figure out the backhand behind the backhand, then we can figure out really who to put in place for some of these things. So I think, like, given the new social structure of the modern day, like, everything has a backhand behind a backhand behind a backhand, and literally a lot of these things are like owned by the top 1%, trying to like profit through the stock market or whatever it may be. So I think we're all on like a lot of good ideas. Is just really figuring out who to put in place where.
But and I would like to respond to Mr. Kyle's question. But before I respond to that question, Ms. Sheila brought up some really, really important information. She talked about the prison industrial complex, really. And there's a book out, a terrific book out by Michelle Alexander called The New Jim Crow, that highlights all of the things that Ms. Sheila says that were very poignant and accurate, and that this is all by design. I talk about this in a lot of my research, the school to prison pipeline, and how we're manufacturing inmates, basically. We're manufacturing inmates from school, from age-old school-age children, manufacturing or moving them towards incarceration through all of our policies and practices in the school system, right? And Ms. Sheila talked about that in many ways, and we need to really analyze that. What's happening? What are we doing? How are we How are we dealing or addressing those kinds of issues? But to your point, and there's another book too, if you guys ever get a opportunity to read, it's called The Critical Race Theory by Delgado and Steph Sinek. It's called The Critical Race Theory. It's a terrific book and kind of understanding how the system is designed. And I think Ms. Sheila talked about this a little bit as well, how there's no dismantling it. There's no dismantling the system. The system almost has to Ms. Sheila's point, if you think this, the system has to be torn completely down and resurrected or restructured so that we can move forward. But to your question, do we leave? What do we do? I don't know, and this is just in my opinion. We've contributed so much to this country. That doesn't seem plausible to me, to then say, let's move and relocate. We don't know much about any other place besides here. Our thing is, or at least my thing is no, I'm gonna force you to recognize my value. That should be a part of our discussion. How do we insist that you guys recognize our value? Does that mean creating our own community like the Black Wall Street or something along that line? It's something that we need to explore. In my estimation, I don't know if that's necessarily an answer, but I, in my own way, empowering young brothers, making sure young brothers understand the importance of education. Now that I'm, they call it the academy. Now that I've reached the ivory tower, if you will, making sure that I create opportunities for other brothers to come along, come through this crack. They only allow my foot to be in a door. But, if a couple of brothers come along, we can crack this door open and really allow for some real opportunities, therefore changing or tearing down the old way of doing things and introducing a new way of doing things. That's just in my estimation, you all.
Agreed.
Yeah, I agree. That's the system needs to be, turned down totally, like just throw everything they have right now out of the door and rebuild it from the scratch. Because I mean, there's a lot of things they put in place that isn't supposed to even put in place. Like for instance, tickets. They have to reach their quota every month. That's bull crap.
Right.
So now you see cop pulling people over, giving people tickets for no reason. In fact, they're even gonna lie to you saying you're going 10 something over the speed limit, which is a lie, because they have to get to their quarter, because if they don't get to their quarter, they're gonna get hit. That's bullcrap. That shouldn't even be in place. Again, like you guys said, prison system. They have to keep it to to 90% for them to those things like that. It's just things like that needs to be taken out of place. They need to throw that out of the door and just rebuild everything from scratch. Take a lot of okay. Take a lot of the advantages they have right now, take it away from them, and just make them know nobody's really above the law. Because right now, to them, they are above the law and they are doing it. Because they know if they do something, they are going to get away with it, because there's a lot of things that support them. And for example, police union, that's bullcrap.
Oh yeah.
That's bullcrap.
Fine.
That's just crap. Because they know they anywhere there's union, basically, you know how to work that system, because when you do, there's some things that you can do, and the system is gonna, the union is gonna, cover it for it, and they're overdoing it. So something, things like that, they have to throw it out of the door. And the other things that I want to, encourage Black community is, let's come together and support each other, like Mr. Washington said. If a Black, if a brother get a big, a better post, try and bring people in. Try and fill people up. Try and have people, don't think about me and myself, because that's what the whole thing is right now. It's me, myself, and I. Once you get there, you forget about your brothers that helped you back in the day. And that's not just in this country, that's everywhere. You know, if black people look at Asians. Once an Asian come to this country, they bring all their family in. Once they, it's true.
No
Look,
lie.
once they have a business, they bring all their family in.
Yeah.
That's how they are. But when it comes to black community, we are not like that. You know, it's all about, they want, even people will bring an excuse saying, oh, they're not gonna let you in just because you don't want another brother get up. So things like that, I think we just have to encourage each other to to help each other out. And we need to get it out of our system saying, we're a minority. Because I feel like that minority is putting a lot of people down. Because they say, oh, because I'm a minority, I'm not gonna apply to it because they're not gonna accept me. At least give it a shot. Keep knocking on their door. One day they're gonna open it. So I feel like we need to get that mentality in our head and not let that minority, put us down, because that's what they want, and that's exactly what we're giving them if we keep having that in our head. So if we think about, this country is for you, is for me, wherever you can apply to, I can apply to it. So I think we should just go for it and, encourage each other to, so just go for it. And then leaving this country is not an option, because then when you leave, then you give them what they want.
Right.
So you don't want to leave because that's exactly what they want. They want you to be out. Then you just let them win. But then when they say A, you say B. When they say C, you say D. Then at that point, the one thing I notice about them is if you can speak out for yourself, they are gonna be afraid of you. That's
Can I
one
say
thing I've
this?
learned about them.
Can I say these two things, and I have to go? Got some other things I need to take care of. One of the things we're doing in New Orleans is to support and to increase Black wealth. Is on Facebook we where do Black folks eat? And since the pandemic, we are actively supporting all Black restaurants. So Frank, when you come down, I know it's some excellent crab cakes and seafood pasta to go get. We have a
Jealous.
listing of all the Black
I
restaurants.
in my bags
So,
right now.
yeah. I try to support at least one Black restaurant per week. And like I said, we do that on Facebook. Where do Black folks eat? And that's what we've been doing since the pandemic.
Pretty cool.
The other thing is, I always like to remind our counterparts that, especially what they call the conservative right or the conservative Christians, and I remind them, you wouldn't even have Jesus on the cross if it wasn't for a Black man, because the Bible said that Simon of Cyrene was compared to carry the cross to the hill. So even when you want to spout your Christian values, without a Black man, even Jesus wouldn't have got to the cross. So I don't care what nobody else say. We have to tell our people our worth. Do not allow them to marginalize what your contribution was to mathematics, to science, to astrology, to engineering, to agriculture,
Yes.
to everything that this country was built upon and the world was built upon. We were the co-generators of it. And until, again, we delete what's in the minds of our children coming up now, again, with the miseducation of the Negro, call it G. Wilson, and re-educate them that when you look at that Asian, oh, they're the best in mathematics. No, they're not. We are. Or you're looking at they're the best cooks. No, Black people who've been cooking all the time. We've been cooking for them. What Paul Chef Pardon, all these restaurants in the French Quarters learn from, they learn from that Black woman in the kitchen, not them.
Right.
And they just took it from them. So when I have family come in from town, they say, what best restaurant to go to get some gumbo? I say, you go to the hood, knock on somebody's house, somebody's door. If they're cooking gumbo, that's the best place to get it. Not go to those restaurants because they don't know what they're doing.
Oh man, I need me some gumbo right now.
Yeah.
Man.
I got a freezer with a few containers in it, but
Oh, I'll pack in my bags.
that's for Leslie. All right.
Can I get some flued out? Can I?
Yeah, because everybody when they come down here, everybody want Uncle Bruce gumbo because I cook the best gumbo. But
Wait a
I
minute now.
want to encourage my great nephew to keep pushing forward. We need great young men and women just like you. And my other thing too is what's going to change police force in our nation. We need strong Black women as mayors, like in New Orleans, Atlanta, Chicago. Them sisters are putting it down. I don't care what nobody else say. Them sisters are doing it. And see, the one we got, she don't take best. That's why the president don't come down here, because she'll tell them where to get off. But I want to encourage you guys, keep pushing forward, because we're losing our great icons. We lost 2 on yesterday. My heart is filled because of those 2 great men that God has called on home. But we have to pick up the banner. We have to move forward. And as John Lewis, as John Lewis said, there's a time, there's a good fight, there's a good trouble to get into, and there's trouble we need to get into. And right now, there's trouble that we need to get into in order for things to change.
Right.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you, Uncle Bruce. You've been such an inspiration and a light to our family and our community. I really appreciate the time that you took to sit down and talk with us today, as well as everyone else on the call and the panelists. This has been a really enlightening conversation, and I will speak for the entire Heritage team. We will definitely be moving these panel discussions forward and trying to identify action items and ways that we can actually really get involved and drive change. One of the things that Dr. Washington said that really stuck to me today was, how do we get people to recognize our value? And so I think that might even be the topic of our next discussion. What can we do to really demand respect for what we bring to the table? How do we drive economic activity for the Black community, and how do we stay unified? So I want to thank everybody again for being on this call, and also send out a friendly reminder. If you're in the Milwaukee area, we are planning that Afro Hub event sometime in August. So assuming everything goes okay with COVID-19 restrictions, we're trucking forward with that. To stay in touch, you can reach out to us on our Instagram page at that.heritage. And yeah, so again, thank you guys for your time. And
thank you.
I hope to see you guys real soon.
Appreciate you guys.
Thank you for putting this together.
Yeah, this is wonderful. You guys did a wonderful thing, man.
Thanks, Kyle.
Good luck to all of you guys.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Be well, everyone.